very grateful indeed to Orca, who are all things digital health technology apps and the approval thereof and the recommendation thereof for a whole host of supply side. And they're very close with, as you would expect, NHS and social care. They do an absolutely fantastic job of making sure that apps are safe that are going to be put into clinical and non-clinical practice. They are supporting this evening's event, as are Voror Technologies, who are across all sorts of data analysis, data implementation plans, covering huge areas of the country. Both of these organizations we are extremely grateful to for their continued support and partnership. Beyond that, tonight is really all about the one and only Michael Adamson, Chief Executive of the British Red Cross, who's finally decided to hang up his employment rights with the organization and give us a bit of a retrospective, but also, as we've just been discussing, perhaps a little forward look as well around the role that charities might be playing across health and social care into the future. And of course, in the chair, the one and only Roy Lilley. Roy, I'm going to leave you in Michael's, I'm going to leave Michael in Roy's very capable hands.
Oh my God.
Okay, whichever way around it is. John, thanks very much. And can I just add my thanks to our sponsors as well. Well, Michael, it's good to see you. It looks like you're hanging up your razor. That's the thing.
Well, you got to let it hang out a little while for Roy. It's kind of yeah. So we had a great month walking in the Himalayas last August, and there's not much water around to do a bit of shaving, so it's that's the result.
Could I just interrupt, Roy, just for one second? Tom has arrived. Tom, would you just like to do a quick intro on behalf of Orca just before we get into this?
Yes, thank you, John. I'm sorry I'm a bit late joining. I was on the wrong link. But my name is Dr. Tom Mickright. I'm the Medical Director at Orca, the Organisation for the Review of Care and Health Apps. And we are delighted to be sponsoring this meeting today with Michael Adamson to hear all about his experience with the British Red Cross. For those that don't know, Orca exists we're all about getting safe, effective health technology into the hands of the patients and clinicians that need them. So we do that by assessing and evaluating health apps and by building and providing an infrastructure for deploying health apps to patients directly. But that's all I'll say about Orca for now. I'm very excited to hear from Michael and Roy. So over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you very much. It's very nice to see you. Right, Michael. Well, I suppose really, it might be an idea. I think if we start by looking back a bit. I mean, I know this is like going to be a bit of a retrospective, but looking back on your career, because we got mainly a health and social care audience here, and the interesting thing is, of course, you've done your time in the NHS. We all overlook that, don't we? How do you? I was going to say, do you look fondly back on primary care trusts? But I mean, how was it for you? I suppose.
Well, it is a while ago, but I can honestly say that it was a. And by the way, great to be here, Roy, as well, and have the opportunity.
Well, I think this is the second time we've had a chat, isn't it? Really,
I think it's maybe the third, actually.
Third, yes, you're right. It is the third.
So yeah, I mean, it was there was that period in primary care trusts for me, or in the NHS, was a formative experience, actually, because I stepped out of the Red Cross. I'd been in the commercial sector, gone to the Red Cross, then stepped into the NHS, and I was in a primary care trust for 3 years. And I wasn't quite carrying a medical dictionary alongside me at all times to have any sense of what I was talking about, but it was a big, steep learning curve. And what I realized, what took me too long to realize was how power worked in the system, really, actually, and that we were in a pretty dysfunctional health and social care economy, with a dominant hospital trust, 3 primary care trusts that were too small to be viable, and an adult social care team that was also struggling. And to be honest, we were broke, so we got serially beaten up for not charging enough in the car park and all that kind of thing, rather than actually really all working together to think about how to improve things for patients. And for me, actually, I now talk a lot actually when I'm in terms of leadership around system leadership. What I didn't realize, that I didn't think about it in those terms at that time, but I now look back and actually observed system leadership that just wasn't working. You know, system leaders who didn't get on well personally, who didn't lean in. They wrote, you know, plans all about putting the patient or citizen at their heart, and yet they're all the same people, but the plans don't stack up when you look at them together, however worthy they are individually. So for me, it was a really formative experience.
Mm. And, you know, I mean, you're close to the NHS now and you see what it's working. I mean, we've got rid of we've got rid of them. We're moving towards ICBs, integrated care boards, which, you know, I look back on my time in the NHS and they're the closest thing I've seen to a district health authority. You know, we all used to sit around this massive big table and everybody was there. You know, the voluntary sector was there, the housing people were there, social services were there, the hospitals were there, the GPs were there, public health was there, everybody was there. Of course, we all had our say, and I used to try and chair this wretched thing. And of course, it was totally useless because we all had different pots of money and nobody would share any of the money because all we were trying to do really was to share our debts. And so that was it was a very difficult time. And then of course along came the Thatcher reforms, and it kind of got a bit easier. I think I mean, who knows really? It probably didn't. But I mean, when you look back on I mean, I suppose the issue was with a primary care trust was the internal market, wasn't it? The concept that competition improves quality and gets a handle on costs, but it never happened.
No, I mean yeah, at that time, because for me this was 2003 to 2006-07. So, and at that time there was a lot more money around, of course. So there was more money to commission from other places. There was much more use of the private sector. Waiting lists did come down. There was improvement in A&E departments and so on. And of course, then there's the perverse incentives created by targets and what have you. But actually, it was a much better time overall. But there were still big issues, and we were unable to create a sense of one team really across the organizations looking at the health and well-being of the population. And that still seems to me the big challenge. I'm taking part in a piece of work at the moment that is looking at how looking at research, a lot of money for research actually, into how community organizations dock with or connect with integrated care boards, because they're in completely different worlds. I mean, integrated care board, ginormous budgets, big leaders, with big responsibilities, and then you've got a community ecosystem that is just not equipped to connect. And even it's even challenging for an organization like our own, where we've got some sense into what integrated care partnerships, the vision is, what the boards are trying to achieve, but actually finding the right place to create the relationships again at scale that enable us to play a part is hard. And we're very proud of what we do, and we've got some great partnerships, but you'd still say that overall the whole is less than the sum of the parts, because each individual part of the system, both within the health system and then across the health organizations and social care, tend to look at things through their own lenses, their own purposes, their own budgetary constraints, so it's very hard to lean into something that's based around people. And that,
yeah, I think that's right. And of course, it's the money thing as well. I mean, fundamentally, the ICBs are an extension of the Section 75. What was it called? There was some fund or other, Better Care Fund, wasn't it? That was called, and it's only an extension of the Better Care Fund. So not all the money is pooled; only a percentage of it is. And one wonders really the extent to which that's going to have the difference we all hope it will be, because at the end of the day, it comes down to the money. And for the next, I think, 3 years, the NHS has got all but flatline funding. And it's very difficult to see. And most of the ICBs are mired in debt before we start.
Yeah, and that makes it even harder, doesn't it? Because, you know, I work in a number of different systems. I work in the international humanitarian system, and that is a system as well with a lot of actors. We work in the refugee space, we work in the emergency space. But what is true across all these spaces, including the health space that we work in, is you have to have leaders who are genuinely committed to collaboration, ready to pool some of their own brand power and potentially some of their own financial resources, in order to enable something good to happen in the shared space. And that's much easier to do when you've got new money than when you're trying to use the existing money. And that was one of my early lessons from those primary care trust days, actually, was we were very good at having conversations about new money and what we should do about it and squabbling over a small amount of money. We were much less good at saying, yeah, but we're spending £500 million between us. How do we reorient and reprioritize within that to enable better outcomes for people? And then you've got the whole thing about, again, I mean, you're more, I know you think a lot about the tensions between how you think about population health on the one hand, and actually, what's the relationship between that and, the National Sickness Service that's trying to fix people, and how you make that happen, because obviously you get into vicious circles, don't you, where you're not spending enough on population health, so you need more sickness, more sickness, and then you spend more on sickness and so on. It's because the emergency always gets, it's the same in the international aid world. The emergency, always you find there's suddenly money available, or often you do, but actually all the work that would have prevented it doesn't get the money.
No, it comes too late. And I was listening to Wes Streeting talking at the King's Fund annual thrash last week, and he was saying, "Oh, I'm going to take the money from the hospitals and give it to the GPs so that we can stop people getting sick in the first place." With the greatest of respect, I mean, that's naive rubbish, really, because by the time people get to the GPs, they're sick anyway. And the keep you fit, keep you well service doesn't really exist. And if you take money away from the hospitals, well, what are they going to do for money at a time when we got flatline funding for 3 years? I mean, it's just naive rubbish.
Well, I mean, it's, we had
you can answer questions like that now because you're leaving.
Let me put it this way. We had a really good session with Wes as a group of charities working in the health space, and what we started the meeting. We only had an hour. We started the meeting with some patients talking about their experience, which is it was a really great thing. I can't take the personal credit for that, but it was really great. And then he really did show the capacity to listen and talk about, well, what are the things we need to get right in order to prevent things getting worse? Now, I agree with you that actually by the time they come to a GP, you've actually got to go further, which is why the piece I mentioned about, the community, all those community assets and all that capacity for prevention, that needs to be invested in and enabled to connect with the health and care system, the formal health and care system in some way. And at the moment, they're just completely different worlds. And local authorities pay more attention to those. But how well are we coming together to make those ththings happen?
Oh, well, I don't know. I've only been involved for 50 years, so you can't expect miracles, can you? So, but I mean, you were in, I mean, a lot of people probably won't realize the extent to which the British Red Cross is actually involved in, you're involved in discharge planning, helping discharge. You're looking at trying to prevent people from falling over and coming to the hospital in the first place. I mean, that's a huge part of what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's one of our big three missions or causes, in fact. And it's very much, it grew out of work around supporting people to come out of hospital, get back on their feet again. And that started out as, quite simple things around, is there food in the fridge? Is the heating on if a frail elderly person is, being discharged? Then, actually, people are very frightened when they get discharged, in fact, because they're living on their own often. That doorstep that, they've gone up and down for the last 50 years with not a problem. Now it seems like Mount Everest, they're going up or down because they're frail and wobbly and so on. And so that's then grown and deepened into expertise around, really around managing, supporting people with quite complex casework, because some of the people are being discharged with much more complicated needs. And the fastest growing part of our work with the NHS is around the people, we call it the high intensity user services that are now in, so we're in about 100 hospitals across England, and then 25 to 30 hospitals we've got, we're in A&E departments where people are coming to A&E departments literally hundreds of times a year. And of course, it's not, they may well be sick and need help, but they're not fundamentally there because they need an A&E doctor or an A&E consultant. They're there because their lives are chaotic. They may have mental health challenges. They may have drug and alcohol problems. There's a chap called Graham that we supported, who went to his A&E department 300 times. And it took us a week or two to build the confidence with him, where the support worker left a bun and a message outside his front door for a week or so to try to make contact and so on. Eventually he opened the door, built a relationship, found out what his needs were in terms of access to benefits. You invariably find chaotic environments that they're living in, and they just can't port in this vortex. Sometimes I say combined with mental health issues. By getting alongside them over the course of sometimes 6 months or more, this is not a quick fix. And where we spend, and I was chatting to the team last week actually, they emphasize that you've got all these formal people. They've got the community mental health team, you've got the social work team, you've got maybe the hospital support, but actually they spend 10 to 15 minutes, looking at a slice of a person. What our team do is take 90 minutes to 2 hours to really understand the person and what the issues are, and then help. And in the case of Graham, by connecting him into other support and services, in the following year, he only went to the A&E department once, and I think he went to his GP once. Now you think about the gains for Graham in terms of the agency, to use that word that we never used to use, but that sense of control in his life that he then has. But also you think of the impact that that's having in terms of the reduced demands on the NHS as a result, and actually people being freed up to do the jobs they are hired to do. And actually, it was interesting, the Patricia Hewitt's review of integrated care boards, she put a lot of emphasis on actually prevention again, which we've all known about for a long time. This is about prevention. This is about preventing Graham needing to go. And actually, how. But
the thing is, Mike, you're actually doing it, aren't you? And so how is that funded, that piece of work? Because you can't just turn up and help somebody. You've got training, you've got to understand the benefit structure, you've got all kinds of governance and safeguarding and what have you. I mean, this is not, and you can't just turn up and knock on the door. So how does that work?
Well, that's funded out of integrated care boards often. Yeah.
So just to be clear, you've got contracts with 100 hospitals, so that's like nearly half the hospitals, a third of A&Es. I mean, that's a big chunk of work. I mean, I think very few people understand the penetration that the Red Cross has got in the NHS. A lot of people say, what the hell is a charity doing working in the NHS? But because that's part of your contract income. But and I remember, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, later on, but I remember when you had a bit of a run-in with the government, when you've said some exciting things about the role of the Red Cross in the NHS. But I mean, how does that work? So it's funded through a contract. Yes. And then you must run quite in-depth and very complicated training courses.
Yeah, well, I think I'd put the emphasis. Yes, absolutely. We train people, but actually but we put a huge amount of effort into the people we select in the first place to find the right kind of people who can do that kind of work. And what I would say, we work in 3 big causes: people in emergencies, people who are displaced, refugees and asylum seekers, and people falling between the gaps in the health and social care system. one of the changes I've observed over my time as CEO over the last 8 years, in all three places, the casework we're doing gets more and more complex in terms of understanding the needs of people. So be it the kind of person like Graham, where actually you need a lot of resilience, and we need to put in place the psychosocial support to our own people to make sure that they're getting, because they're carrying a lot of the burden. No surprise, people coming from Ukraine or across boats across the channel. It's very complex casework. And then somebody who's lost everything in a fire or flood. I mean, actually, they're traumatized sometimes by what's happened. So our people, both staff and volunteers, are having to deal with people with much, much more complex casework than was the case 8 years ago. That is really, really challenging for people, actually. So we're very proud of it. And it makes me really, really proud of the way in which we've made our offer so relevant to the challenges that, not only we face here in the UK, but around the world. But yeah, that's one of the biggest changes. And of course, as health and care, are struggling, let's face it, with the resource constraints they've got, and budgets haven't kept pace with, the growing elderly population, haven't kept pace with the opportunities for the use of technology. Actually, there's more pressure on organizations like ours who are then, doing some of this work. And we do. And the other parts of it, again, because it's not just around that work, then about the work that we can wrap around it, around loneliness and connectedness. Because sometimes we did work around loneliness, funded by in partnership with the co-op, actually. And what we were able to draw out is that we drew attention to three types of loneliness, the opportunities around loneliness. One was the whole thing about a community, and saying good morning to people, and how important that is in creating a sense of belonging for people, and far disproportionate to the sense of why is saying good morning, but it makes a difference. Then the situation of somebody comes out of hospital, they've had a hip replacement, they're basically okay, they've got some resources and so on, but they are isolated for a period. And if you just make sure you connect and so on, you can help them get back on their feet and out and about again. And then you've got the people who have ended up in a situation like Graham, where it might have started with something like an operation, then they were home, then they were isolated, and then that thing compounds. And then you're actually into quite in-depth work that you've got to do with people. And as I say, there's quite a lot in common across the three causes that we're increasingly observing.
Yeah, and the so-called, rather discourteously, we call them frequent flyers, don't we? But we all know what that means. I mean, the numbers of frequent flyers are actually much higher than we think, and the extent to which they consume resource is colossal. I did some work with the trust. This was before COVID now, and there was a guy that your guy. What did you say his name was? Graham. Yeah, Graham. I mean, Graham was just a beginner. This guy had something like 900 calls, it's between the ambulance service and all the rest of it. And in the end, the guy was just lonely.
Yeah.
He was just lonely. And he was getting more and more depressed because he was lonely. I'm conscious of the time, Mike, because I mean, there's a lot that I want to talk to you about. Let's talk about the work that you do around the major events. I mean, you were at London Bridge, you worked at Grenfell, that kind of thing. Just give us a bit of a flavour of that, because I think our viewers will find that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, Grenfell, was one of those moments in my, life and career where, which will just stay with me. I remember, I'll never forget walking out at Latimer Road Tube Station on the Thursday morning and just seeing that, the hulk of that, smouldering building still, and then this chaos of people, angry people with microphones and what have you, and then everybody carrying boxes and so on, and then realizing that we were proud of what we did. We were in the rest center, in the sports center, from the early hours of that Wednesday morning, and we were there.
How does that work, Mike? How does that work? How do you get triggered to this sort of 24-hour thing? Just tell us about the mechanics of how that works.
Yeah, well, we're written into virtually every local resilience plan around the country. So when stuff happens, and we get called out. So I get, I can't remember. We respond to, I think, 1,000 emergencies a year or something. But most of them are quite small. But we get triggered and called out, and I see an update, several times a week of something that we're responding to, and this is a big one, obviously, and that's the way it works. And and it had more in common with the kind of situation you see in an international emergency than here in the UK, because of the scale of it. I mean, obviously, 72 people died, and the consequences for a community that was much wider than that, the thousands of people living around it. And we did our thing in the rest centre. We were there for several weeks, 6 weeks, I think, afterwards, supporting people around the community. But what we just didn't. Well, first of all, we were not representative of the community. We were real wake up call in the fact our diversity did not reflect the diversity of the community we were serving. That's not good, and we trying to do things about that still. I mean, it's a big journey around inclusion, but also recognizing that all the mosques, the churches, the local youth groups, they all opened up in the early hours of the morning. They were first responders in this big emergency, and yet they would never have thought of themselves as an emergency response organization. And we recognized, coming out of that, that actually we had to think differently. It was a seminal moment for me around this whole notion of what does it mean to lead in a system? We're a large player, we've got the brand, but actually we have a responsibility beyond what we do to enable the whole to be greater than the sum of the parts, just as in a health and social care system leaders do. And as a result of which, we've invested a lot of our time and resource into helping create a thing called the Voluntary Community Sector Emergency Partnership, which is now 250 organizations, 70% of which are local, which is saying, look, if we make friends before an emergency, we actually talk about what it means to respond to an emergency, think about what capabilities are needed, it's much more likely that we'll be able to ring the right people when the balloon goes up and something happens. And the risk profile on UK emergencies post 2017 is completely different to what it was before. It's a watershed year. And then we've had COVID. We've had these, the way we describe it internally, it's big concept is about multiple simultaneous emergencies. The global emergencies now have UK consequences because of Ukraine. You think of Ukraine, Afghanistan. In a way, emergencies used to happen around the world, and it didn't really have much of a ripple effect back here. They do now. And so I think that the way we think about how we work in a system is really important. That I think one area where the government deserves credit is that the National Resilience Plan now has embedded into it a whole society approach. They have recognized the role of the emergency partnership. And actually, time will tell how well it works in practice, but at least the intentions are good. The right meetings are taking place to do something about it. And actually those are big moments. But I think one of the profound changes for us all, actually, in the world we're now in, is a sense of jeopardy that we didn't have before. I used to go around the world and meet people whose lives had been destroyed by conflict or earthquake or huge hurricanes or cyclones, and they were carrying a level of uncertainty about their futures that actually in the UK, obviously some people very, very vulnerable and exposed, but for a lot of people, whether it was a Tory or Labour government, didn't make a huge difference. The NHS would somehow still limp along and all the rest do its thing. I think people now carry a sense of jeopardy arising from the concept. We talk not just about World War III as a joke, we talk about World War III as a possible thing because of actually the consequences of the geopolitics of Russia, Ukraine. You've got the threat from climate change as a much, the risk register, the national risk register, the threats from the consequences of climate change are much, much bigger than they were, 8 years ago when I started this job. We saw the devastation in Germany, with, many people dying, the whole town destroyed. Actually, I think people carry a sense of jeopardy about their personal, professional lives, COVID, future pandemics. That means that it's just different. They may have less. They may have less bandwidth
Yeah,
for some of the other
years
stuff.
ago I did the Easing World Civil Defence College thing, you
Right.
know, when I was a
Yeah.
leader of a council, and I look back on that, and you know, at the time we thought we were, you know, prepared for anything and we could deal with anything, you know, we've
Yeah.
been on the course, but
Yeah.
it's totally piddling, really, when you think of what has happened since and what we have to be prepared for and how we are prepared. So it's very interesting that you get called out. So you get to Grenfell, and then I mean, it seemed to me that Grenfell was pretty disorganized for quite a time. And I remember the press were calling for the army to be brought in. Theresa May was very slow to visit. I think the government didn't kind of wake up to the impact of that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a public inquiry underway. I gave evidence to the public inquiry and talked about, you know, what we learned, what we observed, and we were pretty straightforward about it. You know, what we do, Roy, when we, you know, because we are neutral, and we walk a tightrope between our independence and our neutrality, but bearing witness to what we see and the humanity of it. So when can
I just say that's a really nice phrase, isn't it? That we can all hang on to, like we're bearing witness, and each of us bears witness in our work and in what we do. That's a nice phrase. Sorry.
No, not at all. No, because I think we bear witness to what we see, and we rooted in the voice of the people we serve, and then we reflect on our operational learning about how it could have been better if we'd done things differently. And that's about us. We've been very humble about some of the things that we've got right, as well as then what government could do differently and how policy either makes people more vulnerable or less vulnerable. And we would, you know, so some of the work we've presented on high intensity users has actually been very well received by the NHS, in fact, because we try to present it in a way that bears witness to how things could be better. Similarly, we've presented a set of learning into the Grenfell public inquiry, bearing witness to what we saw, not overtly criticizing anyone, saying anyone's crap, but just saying, look, there's a lot to learn here for all of us. And you know, we need a different approach to what we do. We need a different approach to policy. You know, the local, you know, I mean, let's face it, there was changes of leadership in the local authority very quickly, immediately afterwards, on a road to recovery, which took, you know, it's arguably still underway. I mean, the tower is not dealt with, and the inquiry hasn't reported, and so on. So the trauma for those affected, you know, lives with them for, you know,
it's a lifetime, isn't it? It's the rest of your life. Tell me about London Bridge, because you were at London Bridge as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there, I'll always remember that, because that happened, I think 2 weeks after the attack at the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester. And we were going up to Manchester for the memorial concert. The memorial concert was on the Sunday evening in Manchester, and and we raised a lot of money there. But on the Saturday night, there was the attack, and I just couldn't. I mean, to be honest, I took a phone call at, I don't know what time it was, 7, 8, 9 o'clock or whatever in the evening, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We then our role there was more traditional in a sense. We were in the rest centre, you know, people were evacuated to and supported people there, and again, but it's about, you know, people traumatized by what happened. But it's interesting, the difference for the Manchester Arena attack and the London Bridge attack from Grenfell was the nature of community. A lot of the people affected by the Ariana Grande attack were not from Manchester. A lot of the people from the London Bridge attack, the people who died, were mainly people from overseas. Grenfell was in the heart of the community. You know, those people, they lived there. 72 people died, their family, then everybody affected by the trauma of that. It's profoundly different when you've got huge, long-lasting impact on a community and how it recovers. And it requires different thinking.
Yeah. And of course, you're involved with the refugees, I know. Tell us about the Red Cross's work with the refugees.
Yeah, I mean, we support people who are displaced all over the world. So, and I've seen, our work in Syria itself. If you look at that, as obviously generated a lot of refugees in Lebanon. Where you got, if you got 1.5 million refugees from Syria in Lebanon with a population of 5 million, it'd be like us having 25 million refugees. So we should keep the numbers in those boats coming across the channel really in perspective, because so we support people in the countries of where the emergency is happening. We support people in the neighbouring countries, we support people along the trails, and then we support people when they get here. We're the largest provider, we're the largest independent provider of support to refugees and asylum seekers in the UK. I mean, not a lot of people know that, because actually it doesn't say refugee, doesn't say that in our the title of the organisation. And what we do is, we do casework to help people navigate the asylum system, and then we provide them, many people in that system are destitute because they're waiting years for a decision. You've got I'm going to try and use moderate language. You've got the issue at the moment that of, tens of thousands of people stranded in hotels because the system is not processing them fast. That's fast enough. That is not inevitable. They're waiting many months and sometimes years for a decision. Consequence of that is, very bad for them, because of actually, who wants to live in a hotel, including people from having fled Afghanistan who've, been working with, the Allied forces in Afghanistan and so on, who are still in hotels with families. Then the aid budget is being used to pay for that. So, 20 to 30% of the aid budget is in 2022 went towards funding that. So not only have we got a cut in the aid budget from 0.7% to 0.5%, you then got some more of it being taken up supporting refugees who've arrived here, because actually the Home Office can't assess and make decisions quickly enough. So we're caught in a vicious circle. And what I always say about refugees and asylum seekers, Roy, is three things. Firstly, and I've met a lot, both in country, in neighbouring countries, and here. None of them wanted to leave where they are. Their first choice would have been to stay where they are with their family, and to live in a peaceful, stable place with their families. Secondly, I meet a lot of people who've had terrible, terrible journeys, dangerous, horrible, difficult, surrounded by threat and death at times. And then thirdly, when they get here, they want to work. They want to volunteer. They can't. They're not allowed to work. So there's so many of them volunteer for us and other refugee organisations. But these are good people, and they're not here to scrounge benefits and what have you. They're here, and they want to make a difference now that they're here. And there's a lot of confusion around who's a refugee or asylum seeker and who's an immigrant, or who's come here for work. I mean, 500,000 people came here, I think in 2022, as in terms of coming here as to work or study or whatever. Only about 10% of them were actually refugees or asylum seekers, and yet they're all treated as if they're the same. Of course, the Nationality and Borders Bill that's about to go through will effectively remove the right of those people to claim asylum. And yet, currently, the people coming from Sudan, from Eritrea, from Syria, 90-odd% of them make successful claims. Now, that's not because we are generous, and we saw how generous we can be with the Ukraine crisis. But the decisions are made by the Home Office because actually they have genuine claims, and yet they're portrayed as if they don't. So it's a, if we're serious about changing,
Michael, what do you think is going to happen with the backlog? Because it's almost like the waiting list in the NHS. It's growing every day. People would die waiting for a new hip, and one can imagine that. What are they going to do? They'll have to have some kind of amnesty, or I mean, they can't send everybody to Rwanda. I mean, I just don't see what a sensible way is out of this.
Well, it's some combination of just got to put more resources into getting the claims assessed. You can also, it's not so much an amnesty. One of the things we advocate for is take a look at the countries where, 90+% of people make successful claims, like Afghanistan, like Syria, like Eritrea, and then give those, and then fast track those people's applications, and then you can move, a significant proportion of the backlog. So just get them through, because you're going to make you're very, very likely to make a positive decision anyway, and then and then work your way through the rump of the cases. So it's not so much an amnesty, because that suggests they won't, that we're just letting them off or something, but it's actually just saying in reality they make successful claims, so let them through. And let's get on with it, and then deal with the people who are from other places and assess whether their claims are genuine or not.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the questions here. I think we've covered Christopher's. Good evening, Christopher. It's very nice for you to join us. Thank you. He talked about working on loneliness, which of course is something that that you covered. He does ask a question about social prescribing, and that's quite natty, isn't it? Sam Etherington with his GP surgery in the East End of London, somewhere in a garden centre, you will find a GP surgery. There are some very innovative things going on. Yeah,
no, there are, and I mean, I think, and so social prescribing is a really welcome investment in prevention. Let's face it, and making services more accessible, but then getting alongside people. And the question is, and that's a lot of the work some of the work we do is funded out of social prescribing budgets, but there's not enough of it, to be honest. The thing is, it extends right the way through, doesn't it, into really good things like exercise classes, that my mother goes to for the elderly.
You're right. I mean, a lot of this is quite simple. I went somewhere, I forget what it was now, somewhere in the West Country, I think, where they had a dog walking club.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to have a dog. Some people did, and some people didn't. And they just went out for a walk in the morning. So they knew they had to get ready and get up and go out for a walk, Simple, but really quite important.
But now, it requires a whole, you've got to, I'm not sure how good our politicians are these days at actually looking at things systemically and saying what connects to what, and how do we join it up to make the whole greatness of the parts. And that's what you need to be able to see the links between these things, to create the conditions in which leaders in the health and social care system can make sensible decisions about shared outcomes, and draw in civil society organizations, rather than just looking at everything through, I've got to meet my budget this year. Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time, and there's still a lot of things I'd like to discuss with you. I mean, and somebody said here, okay, the standard thing, looking back over your 8 years, what do you regret? What would you do different? But looking back over those 8 years, you've seen the Red Cross develop into a really different organization. I remember, when it was first discovered that the Red Cross was involved in helping people get home from hospital. And I don't know if you remember it, but there was a gasp, what are we doing? The Red Cross are people who put tents up in the desert for people who've, been displaced and what have you. Nobody made the connection between the Red Cross. I mean, the connection is people, but I mean, nobody thought, gosh, what are we doing getting the Red Cross involved? It was a big seminal moment, I think.
Yeah, and this, Roy. We've been a partner to government in health, since the First World War, and all the way back to those Red Cross nurses. I mean, it's about us, responding to being a partner in the world in which we see it, as we see it, and sometimes that's been in the big moments like the wars, where we stepped up with Red Cross nurses and what have you, and now we reinterpret that for a modern world. And you look around the world, and the Red Cross is involved in health. In the German Red Cross runs the National Ambulance Service and the National Blood Service. In the Red Cross in France runs big hospitals. So actually, it's the Red Cross is naturally associated with health work, and we interpret that in, really the post-war settlement of the welfare state, and actually say how can we connect things up, and that's really what that work is around, supporting people to prevent admission to hospital, get back out again, back on their feet. That's really where what the roots of that are. Yes.
And it's quite, I was reading about the how the Red Cross was formed by the Swiss guy, whose name escapes me now. But it was in the sort of mid 1800s, wasn't it? And it was a bit of a time, really, because Florence Nightingale was doing her thing. We were at war with Russia. All of this good stuff kind of came out of that time, the Crimea and the need for it. And then that was when nations decided they would get together and form the Red Cross. But it was the International Red Cross movement, wasn't it? But it was a point in history where it wasn't a great time in the history of the world, but a lot of good came out of those mid 1800s.
Yeah, and it's you'd now call them social entrepreneurs. That's what they were. I mean, they saw an issue, and I don't know if I'm sure you know Matthew Taylor. I don't know what you think of him, but it's sort of when he was at the RSA, he used to talk about think like a system, act like an entrepreneur. And that's what those guys did. They looked at what was going on and they said, what can we do about it? And then they did something that had a bigger, disproportionate impact. And it was Henri Dunant on the battlefield of Solferino in 1859 who said, wouldn't it be amazing if every country in the world had volunteers ready to, I think he said zealous and thoroughly qualified volunteers. He was actually quite specific. Zealous and thoroughly qualified volunteers ready to provide neutral impartial help. And then wouldn't it be amazing if there was some rules to war, and that led to the creation of the Geneva Conventions. And that was very counterintuitive even then, rules to war. I mean, who'd think that? But actually, that's where the Geneva Conventions come from. And that is, they get broken pretty regularly, but actually it's still better to have them, trying to set some kind of framework for how people operate.
Yeah. Are you your people in the Ukraine? Are you actually?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we have people. So we've got, the most important actor in Ukraine is the Ukraine Red Cross. And they're an organization just like ours. But, they've grown to illustrate the challenge of an emergency. They've grown by a factor of 10 since February the 24th, 2022, in response to the scale of emergency. And then the International Red Cross movement, including the British Red Cross, has got, right behind them. And, we're now providing direct support in 3 of the oblasts, actually around, as it happens, around Kyiv, including the Bolcha, where the Russians came down to when they were outside Kyiv, and, helping reestablish Ukrainian Red Cross programs in those places, the branches, the home care work that they do, first aid training, and then still can't remember the exact figures, but I think 6 million people displaced within Ukraine, and then about the same again into neighboring countries and beyond.
I mean, in the time you've been with the Red Cross, I mean, the organization has changed enormously in what it does and where it goes. What's for it now? Where next do you think it will go? I mean, it's in the hands, of course, whoever your successor is, but how do you see it?
Well, I find it hard to predict. I think there's certain things that you can see are very likely. I think the casework that we do is going to continue to be complicated.
Yeah.
So I
mean that says, okay, that means more training, more people working in these very sensitive areas. It's beyond just a volunteer coming in doing a couple of hours working in a charity shop, as valuable as that is. This is a whole different thing.
Yeah, exactly right. And I see this sense of jeopardy and preparedness. We can't. We've recognized. When we wrote a business plan for 2020 that we had to rip up by March because COVID happened, and then we wrote a business plan for 2022 which we had to rip up in February because Ukraine happened. So actually, what kind of organization do we need to be in order to handle that? And how do we make sure that we're looking after our people who can also, they're amazing, and we've got better and better people over the years, I think, in terms of the way in which we work and to improve the way we work. But we've got to look after them and actually build in headspace in order for them to be able to then respond to these things, these enormous events that may happen. We've got to think about the big change. The murder of George Floyd was a big moment. So Grenfell was a big moment at the murder of George Floyd, about how do we think about what it is to be truly inclusive and anti-racist. That's profound stuff, saying about how do if we're going to be relevant, we've got to work different, engage people differently and make our organization much more accessible, make sure that people feel safe to speak up. There's a number of organizations in our sector that have really struggled with that. They've lost their CEOs, around those kind of issues. And then tech. I mean, I find it hard to get my head around what technology is going to enable and how, but it seems even the limited contact I've had with artificial intelligence and what's it called, GPT?
GPT, yeah,
and it seems in the removal, the removal of the need for some of the jobs we've got at the moment on, some of the stuff that you read about 30% of the jobs won't be needed. I think we can now. I used to hear those things and say, okay, we've got to be ready for that kind of world, but we're now seeing it and how it can.
Oh, absolutely. And you could get it to write your business plans for you, couldn't you?
Exactly.
Okay, let's be the few minutes we got left. So if anybody would like to ask a question, now is your time. Don't go away thinking, oh, I wish I'd asked that. I think Tom is going to have, if you put your smiling face on the screen and turn your microphone on, Tom from Orca. Dr. Tom, he's all yours, far away.
Thank you, Roy. Michael, really interesting talk, and just amazing the breadth of what you've done with the British Red Cross. Blows my mind. I didn't know that you were involved in half of those projects. So amazing. But I'm also very mindful that, I work in digital. Orca's very much about digital, and we're hearing a lot about digital being used to integrate health and social care organizations. And I wonder if there's a risk of the third sector kind of being left out in the cold with that. How do you think digital can help bring all the right parties to the table? And is that something British Red Cross have thought about?
I think, I think the answer, Tom, is there's an app for that, which Orca would be very pleased to assess. But it is interesting, isn't it? Because quite a lot of these charities, they can't get, in the early days, you'll remember this, Michael, they couldn't get contracts because their balance sheet wasn't strong enough. And the Treasury rules said you can't have a contract that's worth more than 30% of your balance sheet value. And of course, a lot of these charities got frozen out because their balance sheets weren't strong enough.
Yeah, and picking up Tom's question, technology's transformed the way we provide support in emergencies, for example, because we now do cash. We can do instant cash to people whose lives have been affected by floods, fires, both here in the UK and around the world. We can get a Ukrainian refugee arriving cash within a couple of hours. We give them a PIN number. They go to and you can actually do similar things in many developing countries with smartphones and so on. So that is transforming things. I think the way in which we use tech to generate insight, I think has got a lot to offer. I'm struck by, we've got shed loads of data, an analysis of deprivation and vulnerability and so on. We're getting much better at trying to use that to determine where the needs are greatest. But actually, what we need is live intelligence about where people are being forgotten and falling between the gaps. And actually, how do we use tech to enable that? And you're right. Both of you are right to be highlighting that. Some smaller charities, they struggle to have the resources to enable them to take part in that. At least we can have a crack at it. But some smaller charities just haven't got the resources to do that. And they're just as people can be digitally excluded, they can be. digitally excluded. And so I think that's, we would love, well, maybe we should be talking, Tom, but, about what we can do about that. And in order
that's that connectivity is important, isn't it? Really, where smaller charities maintain their independence and their identity, but they work in some associate basis with you under the umbrella. I mean, you've got something like 48 million quid's worth of liquidity, haven't you, that you can use in the emergency? I mean, this is a big organization. So, but and a lot of charities will get nowhere near that. But as you were saying in Grenfell, it's the local bit that matters, the local piece. So creating some kind of umbrella organization that say, I am like the Fred Smith whatever it is charity in Lewisham, but I'm associated with the Red Cross and we work with them as and when. So I think the technology has the capacity to bring that together. We've got a few minutes left, Mike. So what's next for you?
Well, I mean, anybody got any ideas? So here's my
yeah, stay where you are. You're doing a great job.
Well, I think so I've been at it for 8 years and 4 years as MD before that. So it's just I've seen too many leaders stay as CEO for too long, and the organization will benefit from fresh lenses and perspectives. And I've got to decide the third act. What am I going to do? So two things I'm actually passionate about are social impact and system leadership. And I think that there's that how we work on those things together is really, really important. And I have a research proposition which is the hypothesis behind which is that when you look at these big issues like end homelessness, fair deal for refugees, getting a health and social care system to work better together, that actually you can have individually good or excellent organizations. It might score 8, 9 out of 10. I'm not saying we do, but actually collectively we're scoring 5 out of 10 because actually we are not working together well enough. And I'm interested in, either being part of some research, and I've got a proposition which has been very well received, but we're working out how to take forward around, how you unfreeze those systems and what are the qualities of system leadership you need, and how do we create a new generation, the next generation of leaders who are more likely to lean in to create, to work together in the ways that address some of those challenges and problems that we've talked about. Talking to a couple of universities about it, and a think tank, I'd love to try and get something going. I'm going to do a coaching qualification as well, so going to be in the market for some coaching, offering some coaching.
Well done. You can leave me out of that, but I love the system leadership thing because I think there's I think ICBs are the last best chance the NHS is ever going to have to understand the skills and the need of people working together. But unfortunately, most of the people that are running these things have run them under the old systems. And I don't think they really, it's not they don't want to do it. They just don't have the skills, as you say, to lean in and understand what that means. And the IHM, of course, IHSCM is very interested in system leadership. John runs some very successful courses on that. So perhaps we'll ask you to come and work with us on that. I'm against the buffers of time. This is not long enough. We needed 2 hours and not an hour. Can I just say, I mean, I've known you since you first started at the Red Cross. If I may say, as an outside observer, I think you've done a fantastic job, Mike. I really do. And you deserve a huge pat on the back. And we'll be I'm sure the Red Cross will be very sorry to leave you. I hope we don't we don't lose you as well. And I very much hope we can keep in touch and you can come back and tell us all about the new things you're doing. So congratulations and thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thanks so much, Roy. I really enjoy it as always. It's a great stimulating conversation. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Over to you, John.
Well, I've been blown away there. I've been absolutely blown away, flabbergasted even. I echo Tom's point about understanding the breadth of what the British Red Cross does. It's humbling to think what you manage to do and the extent to which you support so many, really big organizations, nations even, and certainly citizens to live safely and feel loved and supported. And I think that's an absolute testament to your time there. So yes, I echo Roy's points. Don't be a stranger to us. Please, please, please consider doing a system leadership short course masterclass for us. at the Institute. I think our members, just nod if you're on camera at the moment, you remember, nod away if you think that's a good idea. I think that would be an absolute stunner if you fancy helping the Institute out in that regard. But Michael, don't be a stranger. Stick around. Let's hear more from you. For now, though, thank you to Roy. Thank you to Michael. Thank you to Orca. Thank you to Varroa Technologies. We'll see you all on the next one. If you're coming to London Wednesday and Thursday this week, it's our national conference at London Excel as part of the Health Plus Care Show. Do please come and see us. It'd be fantastic if any of you who are members want to pop in. It's free and there is an absolute galaxy of content for you to enjoy. All right, we'll leave it at that for this evening. Thanks so much, everybody. It's been a delight. Thank you.